Welcome to the Employer Content Show, part of the Talent Insight series, brought to you by HireWell and CareerWell. I'm your host, James Hornick. Joining me is my co-host, now from Before You Apply, which we'll have to talk about.
Okay.
Employer brand influencer, Nate Guggia.
Oh, man.
Killed you on that one.
It's the worst one yet.
You're so mad right now.
Oh, I'm so
I just called you an influencer.
I know. All right. Moving on.
All right. So before you apply, you want to tell, because you had a big day on LinkedIn today. You updated your job. You're at the same company, kinda.
Yeah.
You're at the new sister company.
Yeah.
Or the new product.
Yeah. So the short of it is, probably 8 months ago, we had the idea. We wanted to make the creative services work that we do a little bit more scalable. See if we could productize it as much as possible to make it widely available to a lot of people who need creative help when it comes to employer branding. We put our heads together. We came up with what is now Before You Apply. And it sits under the umbrella of job portraits. And what we do is we help teams create authentic video content at scale. And we guide the process and we lead it because that's kind of what we do best. So we create team profiles for teams that are hiring. We ask some really tough questions. We turn those questions into video clips. And it's basically like a mini career site at the team level. And we launched it officially today.
When you sent me the mock-up of the first example you had up, one of your clients, I'm like, well, this makes too much sense. Like, who wouldn't want to have this up, and it's so simple too. So I'm a fan. So
thanks, man. Yeah.
Although when I went on what was the post you made? I think I went on it and it was, there's a video introducing it and it wasn't you, it was some other guy. I'm like,
oh yeah.
They have Nate. Nate's the face of it anyway.
Wow.
All right. So what are we doing today? Today's is this number 8 or number 9? I don't even remember. Plus we've done a couple before this. So we'll say roughly we've done 10. This is roughly our 10th show right. This year. So which has been cool. It's been a lot of fun. And even though it's only the first week of December here, but due to holidays and travel and different stuff we got going on, this is the last one we're doing in 2020. Mm-hmm. So we decided to open it up to the viewers. So I love an old mailbag. So we did some Q&A. We asked some people for questions ahead of time. And we would just sit here and kind of talk about whatever people wanted to hear about. So we have a few here that I think what backfired here was that we got some deep questions. Every single one of these could be its own show. And we're just oh man, this is not we're going to be sideswiping some issues and hope we don't go too insanely long here. Or if we just get bored, I guess we can stop at any time. But
yeah.
Cool. So this one, we actually got 2 questions that are very closely related. One was how do companies build their recruiting pipeline during the holidays? And we also got someone asking what about employer brand strategies during the holidays? What should you be doing? I think people have a lot more free time, right around now, between now and January than usual. Mm-hmm. Things die down. So everyone's okay, what should we be doing to be more proactive about the coming year? So,
okay.
Want me to go first? Do you want to go first?
Yeah. Start with the pipeline side.
All right. So as a preview, we had so much to say about this that we're actually going to turn this into a blog post. And I might actually do a further kind of podcast on it. So I really think in terms of pipeline, there's I was really kind of thinking about this. There's a lot of conversations you should be having with your own employees, or not just with employees, but your coworkers, the people you've helped hire, hiring managers, and even people who you really liked, who you had interview that just didn't get the job for whatever reason. So first, I think it's a best practice if you're an internal recruiter somewhere, you got to stay tight with everyone you've brought on board. And I know that in a lot of organizations, you might have high volume. It might not be possible. And this might be a little harder during the pandemic too, but I've known some internal recruiters where I would walk around with them in their office and they're just saying hi to everybody there. Everyone knows them, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to always be kind of fostering those relationships. And there's so much value you can get out of kind of staying tight with everyone who you're bringing in the organization. So, first off, getting more referrals, making sure that they're aware that one, you've taken an interest in them. It wasn't your job to land them on board there. You want to be, professional, friends, but it makes it easier to get referrals. It makes it easier for you to communicate to them, hey, this is what our hiring plans are for next year. Do you have anybody who knows about that? Do you know anybody who does this type of stuff? Yeah. But it's also an idea and I think this is where it kind of ties into employer brand also. What do they like about the organization now that they're here? Like that should be impacting your pitch. Like when you're talking to the next batch of candidates for the next search you're doing, whatever got the last person you placed on board, like those are things you want to highlight, both in terms of what impressed them, but also in terms of now that they're here, what do they really think about the organization? Like you always need to be kind of upgrading and updating your pitch about your company, as well as what's falling short. I think that's more of a hiring manager issue. You know what I mean? Like where things, but if you were overselling something, that's also something you want to know about. If there was something that you got someone excited about that inadvertently it wasn't quite what matched, or if there's just in general, is there anything that you need to know that maybe, whoever you kind of brought on board didn't quite see eye to eye with? Same with like evaluating the interview process. Is there anything we should be doing differently there? I think it's also good, like if they really like it, ask them to do a review on Glassdoor or G2 or wherever else. Second thing, like your candidate pipeline. You're going to have a lot of people that you're very close with that maybe you had one opening and you had 5 great candidates. Touch base with them. You know what I mean? No reason not to reach back out to them. I think it's a great way to kind of, because you might have a lot of the similar positions open up. They need to know that, hey, just because we didn't go with you this time, there shouldn't be any hard feelings. Same thing with hiring managers. I think that asking hiring managers about their 2021 goals, making sure they understand that you get their business objectives.
Yeah.
You want to kind of that's where really things kind of break down from a hiring standpoint. A lot of times at companies is the recruiters and the hiring managers aren't on the same page and they aren't speaking the same language. And the more you can do to empathize with a hiring manager to make sure they know that you get them, that you understand what they're trying to accomplish, you can better identify skill gaps. If you're trying to hire something with like a digital marketing manager, and people in digital marketing, they do lots of different things. But if you can understand what on that team might be lacking, it might make you better able to vet kind of people you might be bringing in next. Just as an example, you can circle back on those previous candidates we just talked about, people they were really close on. Are any of these candidates people we should be like talking to? And do you think you might have a slot for them this coming year? Also addressing all the impossible openings that have been lingering for 6+ months. Like, dude, why is this like, you got to reevaluate at some point. You know what I mean? Past that, those are the main things. There's a lot of general organizational work I think you should be doing right now this time of year. Inventory your job postings, updating job descriptions. You know what I mean? Because those things get really stale really fast. And Jeff Smith and I did another show on that, complaining about that topic, which is the long one. Back to reevaluating your company pitch, making sure like you're talking about what's happening now, not what you're not rehashing what you did last year. And lastly, things about identifying gaps. So be honest with yourself. Like, are you ghosting people? Is there a way you can better processize things in the coming year? Is there a way you can change things around? I think you should be, connecting with your internal diversity leaders, getting on the same page with them, understanding their goals, because they're a lot of times going to be stakeholders in what you're doing. Same thing with like identifying news source. And this is a big thing for recruiters too. Everyone gets stuck in there. If you have a lot of success with just LinkedIn, you're going to keep going back to that. If you have a lot of success with whatever, there's always, whether it's like technology, whether it's maybe you should get involved in more Slack groups, maybe you should get involved in more community groups. Like there's always better sources out there that you might not be utilizing, and just making sure like, hey, what can I be integrating into my next year to build the pipeline? So I hit you with a lot right there.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had a lot of thoughts on this one.
Yes, you did. Okay. So I was writing down ideas off of everything you were saying here. Okay. From an employer branding perspective, auditing your candidate experience now going into the new year, I think like you've already alluded to this, but I really think anybody who's leading employer branding needs to go from A to Z on that whole experience. I had this conversation yesterday with somebody who leads global branding, not employer brand, but for a really large, like really well-known company. And he defined the way that he sees brand is that it is every single experience that every person who touches your company has, and it all represents the brand. And I think for EB, it's like, go in, see what it's like to find the company, research the company, apply. What part of it is like, where's the friction? What's not resonating? And just make a list and start fixing that stuff. Because I really think I've said it a million times, but I think the experience is the brand. It really is. And start there, because if that process is broken, you can do all the work you want to try to attract people. And it's just going to be inconsistent. And it's going to damage the brand. So start there. I think you talked about internal relationships. I'm hearing more and more about, this is on the positive. There hasn't always been this relationship between marketing and corporate branding and employer branding. They've often sat right in silos, not really having the mutual respect that's needed. And I'm starting to have conversations with people from both sides now who are talking about the value that each of those functions brings to like the overall organization. If somebody doesn't have that going on right now, I think now is a good time to start those conversations. You know, we're either working on initiatives right now going into the new year, or we have more time, but either way, it makes sense. Now's the right time to have those conversations. And then, you know, something we talked about on a past episode is like building this content framework. Putting something in place that gives your employees the ability to be content creators, and just putting the process in place. If you have time, like I can't stress this enough, if you actually have some time right now, auditing your candidate experience and building that framework to turn your employees into content creators are like probably two of the biggest things that you could do going in that will just make your life and work so much easier.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's for recruiters and talent acquisition people, it's very much an industry of you're forced into being reactive, you know?
Yeah.
We lost somebody. We got to you always have much time to do the proactive things, but these things pay off in spades. So
yeah.
No, it's good. We just spent 13 minutes just talking about that. To the next question.
All right.
How do you best stir up employee engagement?
Do you want to start?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was thinking, so I'd think of three things. So first off, the first two things they're kind of similar. I'm a big believer in doing surveys, doing employee engagement surveys, 360 surveys, something like that, and then taking action. Like that's the key thing. And also the second part being you need to have more one-to-one conversations with people, you know, people on your staff, understanding how they're doing, what they're enjoying, and then taking action. I think a lot of companies they'll talk to people and they'll do surveys, but nothing ever happens. And when people realize that it's all just lip service, like you can't actually follow through on the feedback they've given you, that's where things start to break down. So I think just by the fact that employees know that you've actually listened to them and you've actually taken action on it, I think that does a lot. And then the other thing, I think taking next level, employee run initiatives. Like for us, I've talked about this before, content is an employee run thing. So we don't have a content team. I think we're pretty good at content, but it's all people it's something we do extra, something we do on the side, something we do that we're interested in. Same with we have a diversity inclusion committee. We do a lot of charity work. So these are some things that just we as an organization do. And I'm not saying this to kind of pat ourselves on the back, but these are examples of things that we do that I think anybody can do. But the key is like letting employees actually be the leaders of all these different functions and letting them kind of like come up with the ideas, come up with what should be done. And just, it's a way of kind of going past just ask them about what they want to see happen and taking action on it, but actually letting them take the action and taking the leadership role in those types of things.
When I'm thinking about employee engagement, like the first question I have is, sorry about the plane. The first question I have is like, what's the goal? Like, why do you want employee engagement? Do you want it for feedback? Do you want to inspire employees to get the word out? Like, what are you looking to achieve? On the feedback front, sorry, is that really loud?
The plane's just hanging there. It's not going anywhere.
Seriously, it's right above me. On the feedback front, I really think like if you're looking, especially if you're leading employer branding and you're looking for feedback on the brand, the best way to do that is like boots on the ground, like this like hand-to-hand combat style where you actually have the conversations. Because, you know, again, outside of employer branding and talent acquisition and like that function, a lot of people don't understand what employer branding even is. And so surveys don't work very well if there isn't like that foundational understanding of what this stuff even is. But employees, I've learned, like just in conducting my own focus groups for projects that we run and just like talking to other people who've done it, employees are very open to giving feedback. And when you give them like the space and the ability to do that freely, you're going to get some like really great feedback from people. Now, if we're talking about engaging employees to inspire them to talk about the company, let's say it's already assumed that you have a great culture and that it's a great place to work. Outside of that, I think going back to what you were talking about employees being content creators and just content in general. I've seen this firsthand where if you create something and you share it internally, it gets people very excited about the work that you're doing. It shows them what employer branding looks like. It shows them why this stuff is important, and it compels them to want to just like naturally be a part of it. Like just talking about like what we do with Before You Apply. At the tail end of a project, we do what's called a launch day. And we come in and we basically like hold the hand of the team, both the recruiting team and whatever team that we're profiling. And we take them through a series of steps to help to show them what the content looks like, explain to them why it's important, help them with like, this is how you share it out. This is how you tell people about it. And it just gets people excited about the work. You just have to be really, really good at marketing internally. And if you can pull that off, employee engagement around employer branding kind of starts taking care of itself. And you start creating this culture of everybody just wants to be a part of it.
I've seen that too. Like companies where people are just proud of what they've built as an organization, and then they realize that they're part of that. You know what I mean? It's because of them. You know what I mean? I think that there's, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of rambling, but I can totally see that happening.
Yeah.
I guess I started talking. I had nothing to add.
No, it's okay. But I know that that this is a sticking point for employer brand leaders. They need feedback in order to do their work, and they also want to get employees engaged. But the approaches that they're taking aren't really met with like the best results or like the most enthusiasm. Right? They'll send out a survey, they'll do whatever, and employees like their engagement numbers are very, very low. And I think it's like you really got to take it to this like manual approach where like, let's start with focus groups. Let's get people understanding what this is. Let's educate them on why employer branding is important, show them what it looks like, and then go from there.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Here's one. I know you, I don't think you were so high on touching this one. How do you position employer brand after an internal crisis? I'll give you some context here. So,
okay.
There was someone, one of our buddies actually had this one. So there was an organization that the founder said some public racist remarks that were just very damning. And I don't want to make this specifically about that because there's lots of different types of crises, right? So I was thinking like product crisis, like you're Boeing and all of a sudden your planes are murdering people. Fraud, there's Theranos, there's tons of places that committed outright fraud. How does employer brand kind of play into this? And so to everyone listening out there, Nate and I were kind of talking this beforehand. Employer brand is different than PR. So PR's function, I'm not a PR person either, which is why me answering this question is not, I could be getting this completely wrong, but your PR department has to take a stance. It has to say something, has to somehow put a bow on it, no matter what it is. That's literally their function. I think but employer brand's that's not really employer brand's function at all. And I think we can talk about this as the challenge of employer brand in terms of, some companies want to create a great culture and then show it off. Some companies just want to put a bow on a bunch of crap. And that's two completely different situations in terms of like how companies look at employer brand. Like, do they generally want to create a great company first and then humble brag about it, which is totally cool? Or are they just trying to like look flashy, even though they've got some very serious things wrong with them? So I think you also have to look at, are we talking about, is this bad press, or is it like something really wrong? There's always, the FANG stocks, Google and Facebook, they're always getting sued by somebody, you know what I mean? Like, it's not even a story, you know what I mean? Is that something you really need to address, employee brand wise? But I look at it this, so here's how I'll try to answer this question. If I were an internal employer brand person at a company, so I'm not talking what the company should do, but I'm a practitioner of employer brand at an organization. Number one, are you allowed to be on the inner circle of handling the crisis? Do you have a seat at that table or not? Two, is there a legit effort to do right by the employees and external stakeholders? Like, are they trying to fix this, or are they trying to make it look that way? So if the answer is no to either of those, just find a new job. It's as simple as that. Like, if there's a crisis and you're the employer brand person and you're not being included on what this company's doing, if they had something really bad happen, like, what are you still doing there? Like, they clearly don't actually value employer brand. And and the same thing for the other thing. If you can tell that they're just trying to put a spin on things without trying to correct the issue, once again, like, that's not, you don't want your name attached to that. You know what I mean? There's better companies out there to be working for, I think. So that's how I would, like, I just don't think, like, you can't operate and do your job ethically as an employer brand practitioner in an environment like that. Because, like, again, crisis management is not your responsibility. You know what I mean? That's a PR thing. But if you aren't given a seat at the table, there's no point.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You good? Did you have anything to add? You still?
No, I'll add something. I know I wanted to stay away from this one, but I'll add. You're right. There's varying degrees of issues, I guess. I do think, though, it's unavoidable. I mean, you can't avoid talking about them, and getting out in front of it with, like, some level of transparency goes a really long way. And it's kind of like, think about every baseball player who's been busted or accused of doing steroids who denies it. That stigma sticks with them. But the ones who've come out and owned it, we forgive them almost instantly. Like, it's like, oh yeah, like, he owned it, like, great, whatever. And we move on. But and I think the same thing goes with companies where, and especially on the talent side, where this is a combination of, like, external and internal communications. And it's like, what level of transparency and ownership can we take? How far can we take that with our candidates? Because they know this is, like, super public. They're going to have questions. So how much can we, like, just own this and be like, hey, this is what happened. Here's what we're doing to fix it. And here's how we're improving as an organization. We're better because of it, and then how do you translate whatever messaging you come up with internally, so that messaging is consistent? And that's really important. And if you can do that, if you can get that far, and that level of transparency, of course, is like a sliding scale. I just think it goes a really, really long way with just overall trust.
Yeah, perfect. I think between the two of us, like, we knocked that one out of the park. So I don't know what you were so worried about.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
All right, let's move on to bigger issues still. How can you actually? So we got this one from both a recruiting standpoint and from an employer brand standpoint. How can you address ageism in your recruiting efforts, especially at startups?
Yeah.
There's also how do you prevent inadvertent ageism in employer brand?
Yeah.
You want to go after one first? Because I think I feel like I've been talking too much here.
Yeah. Inadvertent ageism. Okay. This is where startups especially can be susceptible to this, because startup culture is very young. And I think there might be a couple reasons for this. One, startups, even the ones who are well-funded, can be cheap, especially when it comes to talent. And they can pay younger people less than they can pay somebody who's, like, more senior. And I think that definitely factors into it. Also, the way that we work now and technology and how fast things move and all that it just plays to a younger audience. At the same time, something that I'm extremely passionate about and I think about a lot is like how these types of companies can just like widen access to other people, to give people like, especially like older people. And when we're talking older, I mean, I fall into that category. I'm 42 and like, I'm old for startup culture. And how would somebody like me or somebody who's 50, who's might be highly skilled or looking to pivot their career and start fresh and who's willing to take a step back and all this kind of stuff, like how can they get in? And I think that's just like going back to like something you said earlier about taking a really hard look and like an honest look at your hiring practices and what talent acquisition means to you and to your company. And we talk a lot about diversity. There is a lot of talk about diversity. I don't think there's enough talk about diversity of age. And so I think it really just starts with like organizational self-awareness and being honest with yourself. So like, hey, maybe there's some people that we're not giving access to who could be really good fits, and actually like balance out our culture a little bit more to bring in some like alternative perspectives, whether that might be even political, generational, whatever. I think it only makes companies better, but I do know that it exists. And I think companies just, I don't think it's necessarily intentional. I just think they don't pay enough attention to it.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. So I would say that if anybody's really interested, I've been meaning to try to get her back on the show. The first or second podcast I did was with Patty Temple Rocks, and she wrote a book on ageism, and we got in pretty granular detail, and her book is great. I learned so much just from that podcast in particular. It sticks out more than any other I can think of. The first thing I think addressing it, it's a recruiting issue versus a hiring issue. So it starts with hiring, right? I think the one thing, if I could really urge anybody to do, is you have to wrap your head around the fact that culture fit is garbage, because culture fit is code for personality and background and things that when you start defining it, you're going to really tightly skew the population typically to your young up and comers from a certain school, certain background and whatnot, when really what matters and what you should care about is values. Does this person have integrity? Does this person, whatever you define your corporate values to be. And when you start making that the emphasis versus someone who looks and talks and whatever, I think people did this. I think people inadvertently made things very discriminatory based on a defined company culture for a long time without realizing they were doing anything wrong. Yeah. And it's not until you really kind of take a step back, you realize. So first, just realize that, right? There's a lot of misconceptions about older employees that classic recruiting and classic hiring was always that you can never, I'm not saying this, I'm saying you shouldn't think of this, but this is what the misconceptions were. People who are taking a step back in their career are a risk, because if they're going for a lower salary or lower title, they're probably going to leave us, was always one. Misconceptions about like, we want to hire younger employees because they'll stay with us longer. It's proven that older employees have longer tenures with companies, full stop. Younger employees are more likely to leave you. I mean, there's tons of it on this. I think there needs to be a better understanding too, that like older employees just have different desires. They like back to like the salary thing. There's going to be a point in your career where you killed it at some job and you got paid a ton. It's like, you're not always going to get paid that much. Like, it's just always going to be a high point in your career. And it's not going to go up to the very end. Like, there hits a point where, and people know this too. Like the employees know that like, wow, I really made a lot of money this year. I had a huge bonus. Like, I'm not going to get this again. But that's seen as a risk from employers because whatever reason, and you also have to realize that like for recruiters for a long time, like I would say early in my career, when I talked to somebody, they'd be like, what do you, well, I want a nice place to work where it's a good culture and I believe in what I'm doing. And it sounds like a very fluffy answer, but for a lot of people, it's not. Like a lot of people literally, especially people who are like older in their career, they've accomplished a ton. They're not trying to like necessarily strive to the next level. They want a place where they can impart their knowledge on others, where they can help grow others, which is a different mindset. You know what I mean? They want to work with good people who are doing good things. And their answers, the way they answer questions, can be different than a younger crowd. But where a lot of recruiters and a lot of people who are hiring don't like, we've been taught that those are not the things we should be looking for because there's this youth-based bias. So it's just kind of understanding that like older employees have different desires. Even it's things as simple as like benefits, like that's what really, our healthcare system's messed up. Like you have to work for somebody to have insurance basically, and that's especially as people get older, like that's one of the driving issues. Like younger people probably don't even think about that. Like, sure, I got insurance. Great. Like older people are like, you need insurance, and I think that just having these things in mind and realizing that the reasons you may have disqualified people previously in the past were BS. And that there's a lot of people of all ages that are very capable of doing whatever the task is that you need. And, the answers that you're used to hearing from the younger audience aren't better. They're just different. And just being more intentional, including understanding what those different profiles may be at different age ranges and including them in kind of the hiring profiles you're looking for, if that makes sense.
It does. I have a question for you.
Sure.
So let's say internal recruiting teams, especially in tech, are probably going to skew young, right? They're going to be younger.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there needs to be a mix on recruiting teams as well in order to start accomplishing or like overcoming the ageism thing? Like if you're a 25-year-old recruiter talking to somebody who's 50 or even 45, like, is that generational gap an issue or is it not?
I don't think that's the issue in terms of, I think where there's a lot of value is that I would say people who have done recruiting longer have a better grasp on a range of issues. Like I have a better understanding of business challenges and how to talk about those with candidates than I did 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm better able to vet on certain positions and better understand kind of the bigger picture just from having more, not because I'm older, but than I was, but because I have more experience and I kind of better understand the business world than I did at one point in time. I do think that there's tremendous value. If there's one thing that I think the recruiting industry tends to suck at, okay, there's probably a lot of things that the recruiting industry tends to suck at. But if one thing I want to highlight for this specific point I'm making is that not enough recruiters have a business sense and a grasp on business deliverables of their company or what companies are recruiting for. Like the amount of times I've talked to an internal recruiter and I say, well, tell me about what your company, like, what are you looking to accomplish? And I try to dig, okay, what's your company doing? Like, what's this person, like, how's this going to impact the bottom line? And they can't answer that,
Yeah.
It happens a lot. And I do think that that comes with experience.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think in terms of employer brand too, the other thing so slightly different is if you're trying to make, I was just kind of thinking, and tell me if I'm wrong here, getting there, there's your employer content creation and then there's your distribution. So from a creation standpoint, I guess one thing, making sure all the different populations of people have a voice in that organization. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, I guess this more applies to social, if you're trying to get the word out on social media about what you're doing, about your employer brand, making sure you're intentional about making different people of different backgrounds are involved in that. It's not just all your young, because I see that as a big issue, and that who's going to be most likely going to be the most active on social media is your younger crowd. So you might need to do a little extra legwork to get your older crowd bought into the fact that they should be, whether it's LinkedIn or wherever else, talking about what you're doing.
Yeah. You're making me think of like the power of just like a simple profile on an employee. Profiling somebody who's an employee, not in leadership, who's outside of like the normal generation, that makes up like your general like organizational population or whatever, but I'm thinking like showing that, it's like, it's very important to show like diversity. And I think like that is an element, like I mentioned earlier, that is missed. But like seeing a profile on like a 52-year-old software engineer at a really cool tech company naturally connects all those dots and goes like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. That actually brings us into the next question too.
all right.
I think this is the person who, this wasn't the question they asked. This was more of a rant. And someone, so I had to turn this into a question so we can actually answer it.
Okay.
Is employer brand effective when it doesn't match the culture? I know that this person was a little frustrated that they were talking to a company that's a pretty high profile. I'm not going to, yeah. Okay. They're not in Chicago. I don't work with them. You don't work with them. So just in case anybody out there is wondering who we're talking about, but there's the company is pretty high profile on social media that has a lot of people talking on LinkedIn, right? So they have this big image that they are very effective, employee focused and whatnot. But this person had a very different experience. I believe she tried interviewing there and got ghosted on by pretty much everybody. So the perception was if it's a false front, you know, the reason why I kind of tie this in the last topic, because I remember it's also a lot of younger people, which this kind of person kind of pointed out. So she also felt a little bit put off.
Yeah.
So what kind of downsides, you know what I mean, in terms of, is employer brand actually effective? If you're really involved in social and you're building up this image, you know, is it actually effective employer brand? What downsides are there?
Yeah. So, okay. The biggest takeaway I got from that was it was direct feedback from an experience about a brand. And how often that happens, and how much of an impact it has. So optically, the company that we're talking about has become kind of this like darling on LinkedIn, and you know, and then and it wasn't just her. It was like she mentioned that she knows at least several people who've kind of had the same experience with the company. I think the back channel conversation carries so much weight that it could be damaging, you know? And so, you know, I mentioned this at the very beginning about the experience being the brand. And I think, like, you know, to be honest, there's probably some companies who could just create the most kick-ass candidate experience start to finish and get by on that. Like, I mean, they might be able to, without doing any fancy employer branding, without creating videos, without creating all this kind of stuff. Like, they might be able to just take really good care of people. And the word of mouth about those experiences just spreads naturally. It spreads within communities, whether that's engineering communities or sales communities or whatever, marketing communities. And it does. And people talk, but then this other thing can happen too, which you and I both experienced when we looked for feedback for the show. It was just like, boom, hit. Names dropped. This was the experience. And I don't know.
You're right on that point. I can name a few companies off the top of my head that are just, I know I'll never be able to work with them because they're just so good. Like, everything about their product, their service, the people, their process, like they're just so impressive in the way they treat employees, the way they treat clients, and the way they treat the interview process, that it's just word of mouth seamlessness. You know what I mean? That they have an easy time hiring, you know, and it's because they have all that figured out. But yeah, I think, I mean, that's my concern about like social and LinkedIn is like, I think, you know, we got to start having a fraud watch, you know, like there's going to be, if your social presence is BS, like it's going to come out, you know, there's gonna be short tenures. You're going to notice people kind of churning out of the organization, most likely. You're going to see bad reviews. You're going to see bad word of mouth. You're going to start seeing a lot of snarky comments on their posts over time because people are going to start figuring it out. So, you know, I think there's no way to shortcut it. You know, if you're not starting with the experience, like you said, like the truth is going to come out and people are going to find out about it. So
a lot of people will start becoming consultants. Yep.
Yeah, and then when the consulting gigs don't work out, then they just become advisors because that's easier.
Yeah, I know. You know, just from like a very tactical perspective, if we're talking about just like creating the incredible experience, if you can just create content that talks about the experience and like what it actually looks like, that stuff's gold, and it can live forever. It's so evergreen. Like you just talk about like, here's our hiring practices. Here's how we, but like whatever, here's how we onboard. Here's how we do it. You just document what you're already doing that people love.
So what's your companies before you apply? I'm going to make a company called When You Apply. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to do videos based on the middle of the process of how the interview process works.
Oh, it'd
so
be
people
perfect.
can come.
it'd be the handoff.
Yeah, it'd be perfect. It's just it hits the next point.
Yeah.
And then the third site will be when we onboard, like how the onboarding actually goes and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
It is.
All right, we had one more.
We have one more?
One more question, yeah. So this is going long, but whatever. It's our last one of the year. We're putting like 3 into 1 here.
Hey.
What do you do when you work for an employer who says they want authentic employees and then box them in?
Short answer is get out. But
I said the same thing. I have my notes here. I'm like,
oh really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not going to change. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's just not going to change. There's too much fear there. There's too much fear in what unboxing would look like.
Yeah.
But
I wasn't sure the context of what they said here. So my first instinct was find a new job, but maybe that's a little rash. Like I was, if we're talking about they want authentic employees in terms of they want employee generated content, they want people to be real and be themselves and all that kind of stuff, which I'm a fan of. I take it with a grain of salt that it's still terrifying for a lot of companies. You know what I mean? They may want that, but as we've talked about before, like they still had that fear of, oh wait, we're going to really let everyone say what. So yeah. I think that it's a process. So as companies start allowing their employees to engage more, as long as you can see that process is happening and they're starting to let you do more and more, that's one thing. Versus if you know it was complete BS from the start, right? Like they full stop, like don't care about their employees, and it was just a big kind of a con. Yeah. Which case that case I'm holding firm on. You should just leave. So,
and this isn't just something that happens at like in older industries or like older companies. This happens at young companies too. I've heard about that as well. It's like easy to think about like very traditional industries where there's like, where there's a lot of like compliance and regulation stuff like banking and things like that, there's probably like some policies in place that haven't been looked at in a while that keep employees kind of held back. But even with like younger companies or more like progressive like tech companies too. But I think like I'll just look at you like as an example. I think the reason you guys are so open to this is because you do it yourselves. And there's a real lack of that, whether it's at like a founder level or a senior leadership level or whatever, of like people just like actively doing it themselves. Because once you actively do it yourselves, then you obviously enable other people to do it. That's easier said than done. That's a really big ask, of course, like as companies get bigger, but at the same time, you understand it, you have an appreciation for it, and your employees are completely unboxed. And I can't help but think that that's the result of you being a practitioner.
The bigger challenge I have is getting them out of we took the box away. Just get out of the box. Go do it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's the hard part. No, I think, I guess I'm curious, like, is there, we've been able to hire a few people just because they want to be able to do some of this stuff. You know what I mean? So, which has been cool. And
here's go ahead. I interrupted your thought.
I interrupted my own thought. I think I was trailing off anyway. What were you going to say?
Well, you and I and some other people, we live in kind of an echo chamber where we think that all employees want to be doing this stuff, and they really don't. I think I would actually probably argue that most employees have no interest in doing it whatsoever. They use social personally. They don't really want to talk about their work life and whatever, So we're talking about like a smaller population of employees who are actually like really inspired to do this, which means they're probably more like creatively inclined and things like that. And I think like, if you look at it, like, I think there is like a lack of perspective around what this stuff would actually look like. If you're a company and you say, okay, run with it. I don't think you're going to have hundreds or thousands of employees suddenly being like social media influencers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, you might.
This ties back to what we were saying at the beginning about employee engagement, though. Like, if you have to give your employees something to be excited about to begin with, which is why you have to let them run core initiatives.
Well,
so if it comes down to whether it's, like I said, we like our charity work is run by our employees, our DEI committee is run by, like, it's all. And I think there's a lot. I actually would love to hear what other companies are doing in the space, because if there's more things we could be, other things we could be initiating, I want to do it. But yeah, it's. Yeah, you're right though. Like, but if you don't have tangible things which get them excited out of bed besides just doing the job, then it's going to be impossible.
Yeah. Last thing, and then we'll end. I mean, what we're talking about is what happened with that guy at, was it Sherwin-Williams, the paint company?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. So those of you if you haven't heard this, so there was a guy at Sherwin-Williams. He was a college student. He was a younger guy, I think. He was on TikTok. And he was making videos about paint mixing, and it was like mesmerizing. So you're watching it and you see this color swirl together, and he would do this like not during the job hours, like off hours or something like that. And he was doing a paint that he bought. They fired him. He was getting like millions of views, bringing all this like attention to Sherwin-Williams. And they said he didn't represent their values. He didn't have permission to be doing this stuff. Some other paint company hired him right away. I don't know if you saw that, but it was amazing. But like,
I know,
the most tone deaf boxing I've ever seen. Like, this guy, this is like your best marketer you've ever had in the history of your company, doing it on his own dime in his own spare time, and you got rid of him for it.
Yeah. So anyway.
Anyways, all right. It's been a fun year, my friend. I know you and I will probably still talk over Messenger every day here still, but to everyone out there, we won't, we'll have a show again in January. We'll probably, we'll have some, if you have any other questions, we're always looking for new topics to go into. A couple of these we might be able to do a deeper dive on still. But yeah, any last words for 2020 for everyone?
Gosh, no, I think about like, enjoy the holidays. I know, like this year's been the year, and it feels a little weird, of course, but I don't know. I just hope everybody gets to like relax in their own way. It's been a tough one. So that's it.
Yeah. The sun will come out tomorrow, my friend. Almost did a song and dance number there.
Yeah.
Anyways, that is a wrap for the Employer Content Show for 2020. If you want to hear more of what Nate and I have to say, you can subscribe to the Hire Well channel on YouTube, where we have a playlist of all of our episodes, and the Talent Insights podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and Spotify. Nate, thanks again.
Thanks, buddy.
And everyone out there, we'll see you soon.
Bye.